Welcome to this intensely tactical deep dive. Today we are moving past theory, past all the philosophy. We're getting right down to the blueprint for building a high-leverage, defensible microsauce business.
Yeah, we're really focusing on that very specific moment of market entry. For the bootstrap solo founder, that moment is usually the most fragile. But with this strategy, it becomes, well, the most certain. We're cutting straight to the core of low-risk product development.
And our source material for this it's really unique and incredibly valuable. We are pulling the single high-impact strategy directly from the forthcoming unreleased book, Boring Problems, Big Money.
Which is just fantastic.
It is. And we have to offer our sincere thanks to the owner, the ex-freelancer, for granting us access to this proprietary material.
It really is a rare peek behind the curtain. The material is designed, specifically for the developer, the solopreneur, the architect who's ready to escape that finite constraint of the billable hour.
Right, and start building, compounding automated assets.
Exactly. So if you're building a tool in, say, the spreadsheet ecosystem or any kind of utility niche, this is your foundational strategy. This is ground zero.
So our mission today is laser focused. We are doing a deep dive on one fundamental concept that it fundamentally alters how you approach market entry and product validation. The concept is counterpositioning.
It's the art of strategic antagonism, really. It's a structural decision to turn your biggest competitor's unavoidable architectural weakness into your primary, defensible, and most profitable market advantage.
Okay, so let's immediately unpack the danger this strategy is designed to eliminate.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the single greatest risk, the biggest failure mechanism for the solo founder. The book calls it the build trap.
The build trap.
Yeah.
It's the abyss where, ambition meets reality and loses badly. It's that failure mechanism where you commit 6 months of your capital, your labor, your precious runway, building this complex, beautiful solution based entirely on, well, assumptions.
You just think the market needs feature X.
You think it does. You pour your heart into the code, you launch it with all this fanfare, and then crickets. You discover the market doesn't actually care.
That's the moment you get hit with what the book calls the fear of zero. You launch, and the install count is 1. And it's you, the founder.
It's devastating. And this traditional approach, build a minimum viable product, an MVP, based on perceived needs or feature requests, it's fundamentally flawed for the bootstrapped architect.
You just can't afford to guess.
You can't. Every single day you spend building the wrong thing is a day you are draining the financial lifeblood of your entire operation.
So where does that bad information come from? Why are our guesses so wrong?
The failure is often rooted in what's called the courtesy bias. It's a really subtle trap. You go to a potential user, you're all excited, and you ask, hey, would you use this feature if I built it?
And of course they say yes. They don't want to hurt your feelings.
They almost always politely say, yes, that sounds amazing. They're being helpful, but they're not committing their wallet. That kind of polite, non-committal yes is a financial promise that will absolutely bankrupt your operation. The user isn't malicious. They're just not a paying customer yet.
So if the architect can't afford this guessing game and can't trust that polite confirmation, what's the fundamental inversion of thinking that the book proposes?
It requires stopping the act of invention completely. You have to fundamentally invert your view of your competition.
Okay.
Stop seeing every major incumbent competitor in your niche as an enemy. Start seeing them as a massive, immensely expensive, and entirely free research laboratory.
A free research laboratory. I like that reframing. That's powerful. But how has this lab already done the work for us?
Well, think about it. That competitor, who might have millions in funding and a decade of development history, they have already spent millions of dollars and thousands of hours to acquire data on how to fail.
They've paid for the crash tests.
They've paid for the infrastructure, they've run the crash test, they have endured years of user rage, and they've processed millions of transactions. All of that failure data is sitting there publicly, just waiting for you to perform a forensic audit on it.
So the secret to low-risk, high-leverage development is to stop building first. We stop trying to invent the solution, and instead we perform a ruthless, dispassionate audit on the solutions already in the market.
Exactly. We're investigating, not creating.
Yeah.
You shift from a creative, blue sky mindset to a rigorous, investigative one. We're going to stop listening to the competitors' polished marketing copy, the features they want you to see.
The stuff on their homepage.
Yeah, and start digging into the raw, unvarnished truth of market dissatisfaction, the things they absolutely cannot hide. That raw truth, the evidence of their systemic flaws, that is where we find the blueprint for a viable, defensible product.
This forensic audit leads us directly to the core concept, counterpositioning. Let's get the definition locked down, because this feels like the architect's big aha moment. Structurally, what is this strategy?
Counterpositioning is the deliberate, structural business decision to turn an incumbent competitor's intrinsic architectural weakness into your primary market advantage.
And what do you mean by intrinsic?
Something they can't easily change without incurring massive cost, or worse, alienating their existing high-value customers. It's about finding that crack in their foundation and driving a high-performance wedge right into it.
And crucially, that structural weakness. It's not going to be in their glossy annual report or their 5-star review section. So where is the definitive source of truth for this weakness?
It is found in the unvarnished, angry, and detailed truth of their 1-star reviews.
The 1-star reviews.
Yes. A 1-star review is not mere noise.
Sure.
The book calls it a broken promise. It represents a churning customer who is furious enough to invest the time to write a public warning. They are effectively waving their wallet and screaming for a solution to their specific acute grievance. That grievance is the foundation of your product roadmap.
So we have to actively ignore the 5-star reviews. I mean, those are often vague, maybe incentivized, or based on some superficial delight. We have to aggressively filter down to the lowest possible rating.
We need to find the outrage, the detailed, unresolvable frustration. And the book introduces a really rigorous method for processing this raw data. It's the forensic analysis that organizes these raw emotional complaints into a taxonomy of failure.
Taxonomy of failure, okay.
This taxonomy maps the emotional complaint of the user directly to the incumbent's structural or strategic flaw. You have to stop reading the review as a consumer complaint and start reading it as a high-fidelity, highly detailed technical bug report that your competitor has paid for.
Let's dedicate some real time to this taxonomy because it sounds like the organizational framework for the entire strategy. The complaints consistently fall into defined buckets that signal either architectural failure or what? Strategic abandonment.
Exactly. Let's start with the first category. It's the most direct signal, reliability gaps.
Reliability gaps.
These are the pure technical signals. These complaints read like, the app times out after processing 500 rows, or the script crashes silently every Monday morning and corrupts my data.
That's fascinating. So an emotional complaint, it crashes and I hate it, actually signals a deep-seated technical failure point in the competitor's core architecture. And in a constrained environment like Google Apps Script, what's the common culprit here?
Oh, absolutely. For any developer building utilities in the GAS environment, a reliability gap, like a timeout, almost always signals an architectural mistake of synchronous sequential execution. The incumbent is relying on inefficient processing, maybe a simple for loop that iterates through data row by row, performing a data fetch or an API call for each item, one after the other. It looks clean in the code, but it's fundamentally unscalable.
And the execution environment itself enforces the constraint. The immutable 6-minute wall, the V8 runtime execution limit for any single script run.
Precisely. The incumbent tested their product on a user with maybe 100 rows, and it worked flawlessly. It took 40 seconds. But the person writing the 1-star review is an enterprise user with 2,000 rows.
So the math just breaks down.
The math completely breaks. If each sequential process takes even, say, 0.2 seconds, that job is destined to take 400 seconds. Since the V8 runtime kills the script instantly at 360 seconds, 6 minutes, the failure is not a bug. It's a predictable, structural consequence of their architecture.
And the crucial part of that 1-star review is the word, silently. The user suffers this catastrophic betrayal of trust because they don't even get an error message. The script just vanishes mid-run.
And leaves corrupted, half-migrated data. That failure is the architect's goldmine. Why? Because the incumbent cannot easily fix that flaw without rebuilding their core processing logic from the ground up.
That for loop is baked in.
It's baked into thousands of lines of legacy code. They are paralyzed by their own established complex success. The moment they rebuild, they risk breaking the system for their existing 5-star customers who depend on the old, fragile logic. That paralysis gives you, the architect, a multi-year head start.
Okay, that's a huge opportunity. Let's move to the second critical category in the taxonomy of failure. Pricing fatigue. This sounds less technical.
It is. This complaint signals not a technical failure, but a strategic abandonment of a profitable market segment.
What does that review sound like?
This is a review that reads, they doubled the price overnight, or, more commonly, it's now too expensive for a small business. They moved the features I need to the $99 a month tier. This is the incumbent signaling a major business shift.
So the incumbent has strategically abandoned the solopreneur or the small to medium business market, they're looking up market, chasing bigger, more complex enterprise deals to justify their higher prices.
Absolutely. It's a deliberate, strategic exit. They are scaling up to chase enterprise clients who pay thousands annually, requiring sales teams and custom integrations. They are happy, thrilled, to let go of the $29 a month user who requires zero customer service. This strategic exit creates a perfect vacuum from above for the architect to fill.
But hold on, if they deemed that $29 a month market unprofitable, how does the architect profitably serve it? Wouldn't you just face the same cost pressures?
That is the genius of counterpositioning here. The incumbent often inflates the price because they're bundling services. They have high variable costs from maintaining complex infrastructure, supporting 50 unneeded features, and paying sales staff.
Right, that bloat.
They have bloat. The architect's strategy is to profitably serve that price-sensitive market by adhering to the anti-roadmap. Ruthless simplicity, performance-first architecture which lowers your infrastructure costs, and often risk-reversal monetization.
Risk reversal monetization. We'll have to circle back to that when we discuss things like lifetime deals, I assume. But the key point here is that the incumbent strategy is the structural weakness.
Precisely. They're forced to raise prices to support their own complexity, and that forces a market segment to churn. Your counterpositioning strategy against pricing fatigue is to profitably serve that massive, desperate market that the incumbent just called too small. You win by being radically more efficient.
And that leads perfectly to the final category in the taxonomy, which aligns with that idea of bloat, feature fatigue.
Yes, this signals cognitive overload and operational friction. The user complains, I need a PhD to set this up, or the sidebar is bloated with 50 features I don't use, and I just wanted to sync my orders.
The incumbent is just adding more and more features to justify that high enterprise price point.
Right. It's called relentless feature accretion. A complex dashboard, 50 configuration screens, complex reporting. It utterly overwhelms the core user who just wants to solve one painful, specific problem.
So the incumbent is using feature count as a justification for cost. But the one-star review is screaming that the feature count is actually a liability that's driving churn.
It's the ultimate anti-feature. The architect's opportunity here is radical simplicity, or what the book calls a single-point solution. The competitor can't remove those features. They're essential to their enterprise sales narrative.
They're paralyzed by their own complexity.
Exactly. But the architect can launch a lightweight, one-click solution that only does the one thing the user desperately needs, and it loads instantly.
This connects directly to the boring problems theory in the book, right? The idea that the highest willingness to pay is for a tool that acts as an antibiotic, not a vitamin.
A perfect analogy. An antibiotic is a swift, guaranteed solution to acute, life-threatening pain. A vitamin is just a generalized, nice-to-have efficiency boost. Feature-bloated software tries to be a multivitamin for every possible ailment and, ends up curing nothing effectively.
And the one-star reviews are the proof. Complexity is the source of churn. If the user's primary pain is, my data is constantly corrupt, they need a tool that fixes that, period.
The complexity of 50 extra reports just increases the probability of them making a fatal configuration mistake. The forensic analysis transforms your product positioning from a guess into a certainty. Simplicity is not the absence of features, it's the most valuable feature you can deliver.
So, by completing this taxonomy of failure audit, you have a product roadmap that is fully validated before you write a single line of code. You know what to build, the opposite of the failure, who to build it for, the churning, angry customer, and how to price it efficiently to fill that vacuum.
It's all there.
Let's take the most powerful example from the source material, the slow sync architectural flaw, and just dissect the solution completely. Let's move from the complaint to the detailed technical fix. This is where the developer listening gets their roadmap.
Okay. This is the classic reliability gap in action. We're looking at a competing inventory tracking add-on. The one-star reviews are unanimous, and they're specific. The app times out after 500 rows, and my sync fails silently. This has corrupted my inventory sheet 3 times.
Okay, that sentence, as we established, is a complete revelation of the competitor's architectural weakness. Sequential execution of a resource-intensive job that hits the 6-minute wall. The problem is scale, not a bug.
Correct. The architect sees this failure and uses it to define their own non-negotiable mandate. Build the anti-roadmap. If the competitor fails due to time limits, your product must be performance first. We had to architect a solution to handle enterprise-level datasets reliably within the immutable constraints of the GAS V8 runtime.
So this means implementing architectural patterns that explicitly defy that synchronous execution. Let's start with how the architect handles the API calls and network latency for those, say, 2,000 rows.
Right. They implement batch processing. The incumbent is performing what's called the N+1 disaster. N network requests for N rows of data sequentially. If each API call takes half a second, 500 calls takes over 4 minutes, dominating the execution time.
It's a death by 1,000 cuts.
It is. The architect instead structures the data into an array of 500 request objects and sends them all simultaneously using irrelFetchApp.fetchAll.
So instead of a slow, single-file line of traffic, you have one massive parallel highway, leveraging Google's internal infrastructure. This dramatically reduces the network latency from the sum of all 500 requests down to the time of the single slowest request. You take minutes of latency and collapse it to seconds.
Exactly. This is the first critical step. But as you rightly pointed out, this only solves network latency. What if the raw computation time processing the data, writing to the sheet running business logic, still exceeds the 6-minute limit?
That's a huge concern. If you have to process 10,000 cells of complex data, the fastest network requests won't save you from that execution clock. Which brings us to the second, more sophisticated pattern.
Trigger chaining, or as the book calls it, the continuation pattern.
The continuation pattern.
This is how the architect processes essentially infinite data sets within that fixed 6-minute constraint.
Yeah.
You stop viewing the job as a single race against the clock and start viewing it as a reliable relay race broken down into smaller, manageable sprints.
Okay, walk us through the mechanics of that relay race architecture. This needs to be concrete for the developer who's listening.
The script must be fundamentally time-aware. It starts the job, and the primary logic loop is constantly checking the elapsed execution time, maybe using newDate.getTime. It doesn't run blindly until it crashes. Once the script hits a conservative safety threshold, say 5 minutes and 30 seconds, it executes a graceful shutdown routine.
The graceful shutdown is key. It has to save its progress, otherwise the next trigger just starts from zero.
Precisely. Before terminating, the script saves its current location, the index of the last completed row, or the page token of the last successful API request, in a secure, persistent memory store like the property service. This is critical state management. Then the script programmatically creates a new time-driven trigger set to fire in 1 minute. It uses scriptapp.newTrigger.
So it literally hands the baton to itself in the future. The current script terminates cleanly before the 6-minute clock kills it forcefully. The new script fires 60 seconds later, reads the saved location from the property service, and seamlessly picks up processing where the old one left off, starting with a completely fresh 6-minute clock.
It repeats this sprint save trigger process until the job is complete. This architectural choice transforms the catastrophic data-corrupting barrier of the 6-minute wall into a reliable, background, and highly scalable process. It is the ultimate anti-roadmap fix.
That's mechanically sound, but I want to introduce some fiction here, which is often missing from these high-level architectural talks. If you have triggers firing constantly or 2 users clicking the sync button at the same time, you risk a massive failure called a race condition. That leads to data corruption. How does the architect protect the financial and data integrity of the system?
An excellent point. That is the necessity of implementing concurrency control using the lock service. Any code that reads, modifies, and writes a shared critical resource, be it an inventory cell, a license count, or the saved state in property service, must be wrapped in a mutex lock.
The mutex lock, which basically acts as the system's bouncer, it ensures only one instance of the script can be inside that designated critical section of memory at any one time.
That's right. If user A clicks sync, they grab the lock. If user B clicks sync 5 seconds later, their script just waits politely until user A's script releases the lock. It prevents that ultimate catastrophic scenario where 2 scripts try to update the same inventory cell, resulting in a partial or incorrect write. This protection isn't an optional feature. It's an absolute necessity for reliability.
And it demonstrates to the user, and ultimately a buyer, if you sell the asset, that you, the architect, prioritize integrity over just raw speed.
Exactly. So the full technical solution, batch processing, trigger chaining, and lock service, all of it directly negates the incumbent's structural failure. This leads directly to the ultimate act of counter-positioning, the messaging.
How you talked about it.
You market your tool not as a generic sync tool, which is interchangeable and boring. You market it directly as the sync that never times out. Why? You are explicitly promising the cessation of the competitor's most painful documented failure point. The user who searched Google for inventory sync timeout fix finds your product, which promises exactly that fix instantly and with architectural certainty.
Okay, so we've established the technical anti-roadmap, but the power of this strategy doesn't end with just finding the flaw. It extends into the entire business model and monetization. Let's transition from architecture to finance. How does the taxonomy of failure dictate the business model?
It's a seamless transition because structural failure always equals structural monetization opportunity.
Yeah.
If we go back to pricing fatigue, that complaint that they doubled the price overnight, we find the immediate blueprint for the architect's microsized pricing.
Right, we said the incumbent is chasing the enterprise buyer. They inflate their base price, they create that vacuum from above. The architect steps into that vacuum, competing not just on reliability, but on price and simplicity.
And this often makes the use of a lifetime deal, or LTD, which is otherwise pretty controversial, incredibly high leverage for the architect.
That's interesting because LTDs are usually seen as a mathematical suicide pact. They create this massive long-term service liability. Why would an architect even consider one if stable MRR is the goal?
The LTD has to be used as a specific financing instrument, not a default business model. It's the bridge the architect needs to cross the valley of death, that critical cash flow period between product completion and achieving stable MRR. Selling, say, 100 LTDs at a one-time fee provides the immediate non-dilutive cash injection you need to pay for infrastructure, security audits, and marketing runway.
But how do you protect against the huge long-term liability an LTD creates, especially if the underlying tech like AI or API usage has high variable costs?
This is where the reliability gap and the pricing gap intersect perfectly to dictate the risk reversal architecture. If the competitor failed because they incurred massive, unmanageable variable costs like high-volume API tokens, the architect builds a bring-your-own-key BYOKI model.
Explain the BOA model as an architectural defense against financial risk.
Sure, the LTD grants the user lifetime access to your proprietary interface, your workflow logic, the batch processing system, the engine you built.
But the user has to provide their own API key for something like OpenAI or a third-party CRM connection to handle the variable cost of the compute resources.
So the architect sells the engine for life, but the user provides the fuel. This structurally protects your margins from erosion, no matter how aggressively a power user consumes resources. You've completely mitigated the AI cost disease, that mathematical suicide pact where a flat-rate subscription has to subsidize a heavy user.
Exactly. The alternative is financial suicide. If a user on a 19-month flat rate plan runs $500 worth of compute time, your business loses money. The BOK model turns that variable cost into a fixed cost of zero for the architect. It ensures the LTD funds your runway while you maintain profitable long-term operations.
Okay, let's pivot back to feature fatigue, the complaint of bloat and complexity. We agreed the anti-roadmap here is radical simplicity, but this raises a pragmatic concern. How do you justify a premium price for a tool that only does one thing? By focusing the entire positioning on integrity and risk mitigation, not feature count. The architect isn't selling software. They're selling insurance against disaster. We discussed the boring problem theory. The highest willingness to pay is for the antibiotic.
And the spreadsheet economy is just rife with systemic, life-threatening pain that justifies high willingness to pay.
Catastrophic pain, yes. The source material notes that academic research consistently shows that something like 94% of business spreadsheets contain material errors. We're talking systemic friction, compliance risk, direct financial loss.
There's that famous case where a single date formatting mistake cost the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund, what, $92 million?
That's the one. The user paying $49 a month for a simple single-point tool that automates financial reconciliation isn't paying for convenience. They are paying for insurance against a catastrophic audit, a regulatory fine, or a massive financial error caused by human input.
The simple tool that solves that specific compliance nightmare perfectly with one click has an incredibly high willingness to pay.
And you don't compete with the competitor's 50 features. You compete with their one-star review detailing reliability failure and complexity-induced errors.
This rigorous architectural discipline building in batching, concurrency controls, error handling, it all feeds directly into the ultimate financial goal for many, the liquidity event. If the goal is sovereignty, you need to build a sellable asset.
Absolutely. And the valuation of that asset is based entirely on how predictable and autonomous the cash flow is. This is where the solo founder has to stop thinking about net profit, which is often optimized for tax reduction, and start thinking critically about seller's discretionary earnings, or SDE.
Right, net profit can kill your valuation because it artificially reduces the apparent performance of the business. How does a founder calculate SDE correctly to maximize their asset value?
The buyer needs to see the SDE. It reveals the true earning capacity of the business if a new owner were running it. This means you calculate your net profit, and then you aggressively add back all the discretionary expenses you paid yourself as the operator.
So your salary, any excessive car leases, personal travel, conference attendance.
All the things you ran through the business for tax purposes, but which a new owner would just replace with a single market rate manager salary.
Let's use the classic example. A founder pays themselves a $100,000 salary and reports a net profit of $50,000. If a buyer applies a standard 3x multiple to that net profit, the business is only valued at $150,000.
But if they correctly calculate SDE, adding that full salary back, assuming it was discretionary, they show an SDE of $150,000. Immediately, the business is worth $450,000 at the same multiple. Correct financial hygiene, dictated by this understanding of asset valuation, can increase the asset's value by 300%.
And the architectural choices dictated by the anti-roadmap can help you achieve a premium multiple beyond the standard 3x. Buyers look for stability and defensibility.
Right, they apply what's called a thick wrapper premium. This is for tools that use commodity technology, like AI APIs, not as a simple interface, but as a defensible component of a proprietary workflow that you identified during the forensic analysis.
So if the add-on just summarizes text a thin wrapper, it gets a discount because it's easily subsumed by competitors or platform tools like Microsoft Copilot. There's no structural defensibility.
But if the add-on is a thick wrapper, using AI, not just to summarize, but to perform complex proprietary compliance or reconciliation checks you found during the one-star review audit, it commands the premium. The buyer is paying for the proprietary workflow and the validated solution to acute pain, not just API key access. Counterpositioning mandates the creation of that thick wrapper.
The ultimate takeaway here, driven by the boring problems big money blueprint, seems to be that the most valuable feature you will ever build is not something innovative or new. It's the deliberate negation of a proven, painful, and structural failure of your incumbent competitor.
You're building certainty into an uncertain process by eliminating market risk through forensic analysis. It's using the market's pain as your non-negotiable architectural and financial mandate. That is the definition of leverage for the bootstrapped architect.
We've covered a huge amount of high-leverage material today, all stemming from that single surgical strategy, counterpositioning, driven by the taxonomy of failure.
Yeah, the key takeaway is to fundamentally redefine your research phase. Stop guessing about the solution. Instead, recognize that your competition has already identified and paid for the data on market failures. That data is freely available in their worst reviews, detailing their reliability gaps, their pricing fatigue points, and their feature bloat liabilities.
And those one-star reviews, the evidence of a broken promise, are the highest quality product specification you will ever receive. They tell you exactly what not to build, that sequential loop that hits the 6-minute wall, and exactly what to promise, the batch sync that never fails.
By mastering the taxonomy of failure and aggressively building the anti-roadmap, leveraging architectural patterns like batch processing, trigger chaining with lock service, and risk reversal financing like the BYO model, you transform development risk into a profitable certainty. You build the single, specific solution the market is already screaming for.
So, the final provocative thought for you to carry forward, based on this counter-positioning strategy, your competitor's biggest, most painful structural liability is your greatest, most defensible asset. Go find their most detailed one-star review, read it as a technical bug report, and start building the opposite.
Use it. That review is your blueprint for sovereignty.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.